For a lot of Disney adults, not all of them, but for a lot of them, the whole thing about magic, it's not a joke to them.
Yeah.
You can sort of judge it all day long and say, you're like, ooh, these people are weird.
People use it as a pejorative.
There are people out there who really feel that this is the only brand in their entire lives from the time they were born that is this special to them is Disney.
Welcome to Pop Syllabus. I'm your host, Christiana Mbakwe Medina.
Disney adults. They're one of the most fascinating, layered, and hated subcultures in contemporary American life. To help us understand how they came to be, today's guest is Robbie Whelan, author of the forthcoming book, House of Mouse. Robbie, welcome to Pop Syllabus.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I love your work. Love covering your coverage of tech companies. Now, I want to know, what made you interested in covering Disney?
Well, for many years, I have wanted to write about entertainment. From a very young age, I started my career as a music writer. I was writing, CD reviews and concert reviews and profiles of big, musicians who I liked, really.
People at home, CDs were these circular discs.
Exactly. I dated
that you
myself
used to listen
now really hard.
to listen to music.
Yeah. And I moved on to writing about business news. And my whole philosophy about journalism, if I had one, it would be that I think that every story worth telling is a politics story, a business story, and a culture story all rolled into one. And if you lack something there, like if the stakes aren't high about power, if the stakes aren't high about money, if the stakes aren't high about cultural importance, then to me, you sort of have to rethink, is this a story I want to spend a lot of time telling? And so I've been at the Wall Street Journal for 15 years. And when this job came open, it was the middle of the pandemic. I was living in the Hudson Valley of New York. I was feeling kind of lonely.
All the cool people are upstate, and I hate it for me because I'm not there.
I had a little baby. I hadn't seen any of my friends in a long time. This job opened up. It was covering Disney. And I thought to myself, God, this is like everything I could ever want out of a beat. And so I packed my bags and moved my family to LA and had just an amazing time writing about this company that seemed to be everywhere in the worlds that interest me most. It was the number one cultural story for a while. It was an incredible corporate drama that I encountered, and then it was also they were everywhere in politics.
It's also a music story.
It's a music story too. Hannah Montana.
Okay.
We don't talk about Bruno.
Yes, I mean, like what Lin-Manuel's done with Moana, it's incredible. So we got into how you came to LA to cover Disney.
Yeah.
The topic of today's show is about the Disney adult. Can you explain what a Disney adult is? Like, what do you think makes a Disney adult for the people at home who aren't too familiar?
Sure. So I'm going to answer that question by first describing another philosophy that I have, or a theory, I guess I should say. I have this theory about people, which is that you're either a big fan type person or you're not a big fan type person. If you're not a big fan, you like a wide variety of stuff, and you sit down like everybody else at night after dinner or whatever, and you watch some streaming TV. You don't build your whole life around it. You like what you like. A lot of people sit and watch reality TV, kind of like washes over them. It's sort of this not really branded. They don't get too excited about it. Maybe they love it and they enjoy the leisure of it, but it's not like a identity defining thing for them. And then there are people who are the big fans. And I always tell people this story about one of the first times I ever went to Disneyland. I grew up on the East Coast, so I didn't grow up going to Disneyland as a kid. A lot of people around me went to Disney World in Florida, but the first time I, as an adult, went to Disneyland, the thing that struck me most was how many people there were walking around with t-shirts showing what they were a fan of, but it wasn't necessarily Disney. In other words, it wasn't like you're walking around and seeing people wearing Marvel shirts or Mickey Mouse shirts. You're seeing people wear Led Zeppelin shirts and San Francisco 49er shirts. And I would like to, the thing I do when I go to Disneyland is I just talk to everyone. I stop them. I sit down next to somebody at a restaurant. I start talking to them. What's your favorite Disney movie? Or even just what's your favorite movie? And you'd be surprised how many people who are big fans of the Disney theme parks especially are just big fans of stuff. It doesn't matter so much what the franchise is or what the character is or what the story is even. They just are able to throw themselves into their fandom in this way that's really really intense, really devoted, and really kind of, I would say, identity defining. And for me, I'm almost kind of jealous of those people because I have my favorite bands, I have my favorite novels, I've got my favorite movies, but none of them are sort of the type of thing where I can just watch it 30 times over and over again, or really bury myself in it to the extent that these kinds of people do. So that's my universal theory of fandom, right? You're either a big fan, you're the type of person who gets really wrapped up in your fandom, or the type of person who doesn't. Disney adults, I would say the main thing they have in common is they're all big fans, and they all see the Disney brand as a sort of essential part of their identity. And beyond that, there's not a lot they have in common. So I'll take you through a few examples of Disney adults who I have met. It's real people. There's the family I met one time at Comic-Con in San Diego who are obsessed with old Marvel comics. They're from, I think, Boise, Idaho. And they were this family of 3, a mom, a dad, and an adult daughter. And they had all handmade, hand-sewn, and like tailored and crafted Dr. Doom outfits for themselves. But it wasn't just Dr. Doom. It was like the mom was like Doom mom and the daughter was like Doom daughter.
So like deep cuts and like self-references.
Yeah, this is like for starters, like a deep cut in Marvel.
Yeah.
It's a character about whom they've never made a movie. They will, Robert Downey Jr. is coming back to play Dr. Doom in a coming Marvel title. But like, this is people who are really interested in this franchise and actually dove deep, did research, did like serious crafting work. And it's something they did as a family because they like to do it as a family. They are all big fans of Marvel Comics. That's one sort of archetype of a Disney adult. Then I'll tell you about another one. I know this guy who is in his late 20s, who grew up in California in a community that was very Christian and not super friendly to sort of LGBT people. And he is gay himself. He built a media company himself, sold it, and at the age of 28 or 29, became sort of idle. A lot of money, didn't know what to do with it. He was living in LA at the time, sort of estranged from his family, but very much missed them. And he's a huge Disney fan, just generally loves a lot of different Disney properties. He started going to Disneyland every day.
Every day.
And he would go, and he would, at the time when he was going, when he started going, they were building the new Tiana's Bayou Adventure ride. And he told me that he would go and he would sit above the construction site where they're building this ride and just watch them load in materials, put things together. He would listen to them testing out the music.
So he wasn't even exploring the park. He was watching them.
Oh, he's been to the park enough times to know
so he's like, I don't need to go to the park. I want to see this process. Okay.
Yeah, and then when they opened this ride, he would ride it every day. Wow. He wrote, as many times as he could, 5-6 times a day. And it was a very in-demand ride. It was this restyling of a ride called Splash Mountain that had been sort of changed because of some concerns about the political correctness of the material behind it. And they made it into this new ride. I said, why this one? Why this ride? Is it because it's your favorite, or do you love this movie, The Princess and the Frog, that it's from? And he said, no, it's not even Tiana. It's not The Princess and the Frog. It's that I really like the experience of the ride. It's a great ride. It's not the best I've ever been on, but it's a great ride. And just being there, something about being there soothed me and calmed me. And it being a part from day one of watching this thing come together, which is going to be someday a ride that millions of kids remember from their childhood growing up and visiting Disneyland and riding it. He's like, I felt I was there from the ground up on this one particular roller coaster at Disneyland. And it made me feel less alone. It made me feel very soothed. And I said, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but it sounds like you're depressed.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I am depressed. Okay. And this was my medicine, was going to Disneyland. So, okay, that's another type, right? That's a sort of a little bit of an offbeat example. Yeah. But there are people who are Disney adults who what they get, my point is that what they get out of Disney is not necessarily just some connection to a movie or a title or a character that they love. It's actually the experience of sort of feeling like they are a part of the development of the whole Disney brand and lifestyle.
Well, also you've mentioned like a mental health component of it being
there's a fair bit of that.
Because, jumping ahead, but it's so interesting to me when you're reading about Disney adults or just fandoms in general, right? There is this guy, the reason he can do that, go and see this ride being built every day, is because he has a ton of money, right? So this is a subculture with a financial barrier to entry that is getting higher and higher, and we can talk about that later. And it's kind of this very circular thing where we're in this world that is very difficult.
And in order to soothe ourselves, and the coping mechanisms we have involve us giving money to these corporations and who've effectively like privatized, and I don't say that with judgment, like privatized the feeling of being soothed, the feeling of being free, play. Like, you know,
Totally.
We know that there's something, adults need play just as much as children, right? But when you become an adult, they say put play away. And Disney's a place where you can go and play, but you have to pay to play. And so it's like, it's hard to get your head around.
You hit on something there, which is that I can't tell you how many Disney adults I've met who have said to me that the reason why they love Disney as an adult is because they felt they missed out on some essential part of their own childhood. Either they grew up of, you know, low income, or they didn't have a solid family unit.
Yeah.
They didn't have the opportunity to go on vacation and go to all these theme parks. And I feel like they're making up for lost time. And you're right. You're absolutely right. The reason why they can do that as an adult is because suddenly they have independence. They have money.
You have money.
And they live in this we all live in this hyper capitalized world for better and for worse.
And
where
and you get that fix wherever you can find it, right? And there's a journalist and writer called AJ Wolf. I'm not sure if you're familiar with their work. And she did a survey on like Disney adults. Her people went out to the parks and they found that like 70% of Disney adults engaged with the park before the age of 6.
Yep.
And that is something so fascinating to me, because it's like, on one hand, you're describing the person who like socioeconomically could not get in the club, now can and is spending a ton of money. But there's also a big part of like, you know, I think of Disney of like a Cradle-To-Grave Company.
Yeah.
You know, they're giving out, in 2011, they were giving out like rompers to mothers in hospitals. People get married at Disney. People also spread the ashes of their loved ones at Disneyland. It's like, this is a thing that happens.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's from a marketing perspective or whatever it is, there is something to the children that miss it want to be there as adults, and the children that are exposed to it also want to be there as adults. Like, there's something very compelling about the story this brand tells the world.
Totally. And also there's hundreds of different versions of what this brand tells the world that people seize onto. There are the people who believe that Disney represents to them innocence and sort of the, you know, this view of a world that had no complication, where, you know, princes and princesses lived in castles, and if they ever got kidnapped or harmed or wronged, they had somebody come rescue them. That's sort of the fairy tale side of it. There's also kind of like this goofiness that a lot of people respond to. Another really interesting one that I love is, I was one time at Disneyland and I was in the lobby of the Grand Californian Hotel, and I met this guy who was wearing a shirt that said, Chapek killed the magic. That's a reference to Bob Chapek, the former CEO of Disney, who had a very kind of fraught relationship with the fandom. There was a sense among the fans that he didn't understand them. He didn't connect with them, and he would raise the prices on the parks a lot. He would make it harder to get an annual pass. And there were a lot of fans who objected to that very
because he wanted families,
strongly.
right? And I will never defend a CEO, but Chapek's concern was that, like, hey, we have all these adults with money who come as singles, but he was trying to think about the family of 4, like the future customer.
It was less the family of 4. It was more, he wanted that family that takes like one trip every year or every 5 years from Illinois or Singapore or the UK, and they come and they make this their big vacation of the year, and they spend tons of money. And he thought that the people who were coming in on annual passes, they were by definition paying a lower average ticket price, because if you come 50 times a year, your annual pass costs, you know, $1,000 a year, and you're only paying $20 to get into the parks. That's that's way less than what most people spend. And also the annual pass holders didn't tend to spend a lot inside the parks.
Even the people that are like buying all of this memorabilia, because I know that's a big part of the big part of the Disney adult culture.
There's a mother at my kid's school who goes once a week to Disneyland. Okay. And
what mom has time? Where's she finding the time? She teach me.
This woman in particular is a really, shout out to Paige. She's a really hardworking nurse.
How does she do it?
She's a trauma nurse.
Okay.
And I think that part of it is like, she likes going there to like relax.
Decompress.
Yeah. But she also is obsessed with the gear, with the merch. And she knows where all the drops are happening.
Okay,
she knows where like,
she's a collector, which is another thing about Disney adults. A lot of them are collectors.
This guy who I met with, he's wearing the Chapek Killed the Magic shirt. I asked him what it was all about. I said, why are you wearing that shirt? Why don't you like the CEO? And he said, well, he's raised the prices so many times and he's made it, and he's also blacked out all these different dates on the calendar. So now me, an annual pass holder, I can't get in whenever I want to, like I used to. I used to just come after work. He was a school teacher. I would drop by, I would walk around, see the fireworks, have an ice cream and go home. And I said, well, why do you do that? Why do you come? You're a 50-year-old man, single guy, I think. I was like, what's the attraction of coming? Why are you not going to the bar for a beer or somewhere else? He said that his best friend from childhood was a UPS delivery man. He had heart problems and he died really young, like in his mid 40s. And that friend had been a Disney obsessive and loved coming to the parks. And he had convinced, they both had annual passes. He convinced his friend to get an annual pass. And this guy who I met said, this place is the only place in the world where my friend is still alive.
Oh, yeah.
And where I can be with him.
Yeah.
And every time I walk in here, I'm with my best friend, even though he's gone. And I was like...
You're moved now.
I think that was the moment when I realized that for a lot of Disney adults, not all of them, but for a lot of them, this is like the whole thing about magic. Yeah. It's not a joke to them.
Yeah.
It's like, it's very real. Yeah. And you can sort of judge it all day long and say these people are weird or
because it is judged. People use it as a pejorative,
right? Or of course, or they must have a mental issue. They must be unstable in some way, and sure, that's sometimes true. But like, there are people out there who really feel that this is a place, the only brand in their entire lives from the time they were born that is this special to them is Disney, and that's something that's really to Walt's credit. I have to even give credit to like the subsequent CEOs and some of the
Eisner, definitely
Jeffrey Katzenberg, who reinvented the animation. I mean, that's what I love about writing about Disney. This is a brand that is incredibly important to hundreds of millions of people around the globe, and the decisions, even the smallest, most minute decisions that like an executive will make, a studio chief will make, can have huge reverberations for people. It might not feel huge to me, but to that guy who I met, who wants to commune with his friend at Disneyland during the fireworks show. A simple change to the fireworks show, this particular color of firework goes off at a different time. It's a big change. Might give him a little thrill when he sees it for the 100th time. It's a big thing to him. And it's important, I think, to understand that, because it helps you understand kind of how this company functions as an organism.
Disney's a really big tent, right? You have Star Wars, you have Marvel. And we think a few years ago, Star Wars had like this big thing around race and, who they're casting, and the fandom didn't respond in ways that people liked. But in that same tent is Black Panther, right? And we know what Black Panther did globally, especially now Chadwick is no more, the place that Black Panther has in millennial parents like myself who took your children to the cinema and you dressed up. So it's this incredibly big tent where it's a guy who's like, thinking about his friend who was a UPS driver who is no more, but it's also somebody that was like, oh, the moment I saw Chadwick and Letitia Wright come on screen, it made me feel something.
I'm currently writing a book about Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. And I find him to be one of the most fascinating characters in the last 100 years of corporate America. I think he's up there with J.P. Morgan and Warren Buffett and all these people, some of the people who've changed the world. But Iger would always talk about, when he would give a list of what his biggest accomplishments were, it was always, the same 2 or 3 things. It was like the opening of Shanghai Disneyland, the launch of Disney Plus, their streaming service, and the production of the first Black Panther movie. Wow. And when he talks about it, there's a couple reasons why he says that, why he includes that one movie. I mean, of all the movies he's made, why this one? One of the reasons is that it's very important to him that he be seen as someone who does the right thing, the progressive right thing, in the face of kind of doubters, So he faced a lot of pushback about how Black Panther wasn't going to be commercially successful. We shouldn't make this movie with a mostly, not all, but mostly Black cast. We shouldn't do all these things you're talking about representation, speaking to particular audiences, trying to generate interest from particular audiences. That's not as important as making the movie that, that breaks the box office record and that everyone can watch and get something out of. So he says, he's said this many, many times. He's written in his memoir. He's told it to people who I talk to, look, I proved the doubters wrong. I proved you can take a piece of beautiful pop cultural output like Black Panther, really well done movie, and you can make it both things at the same time. It can be a vehicle for representation and showing Black audiences the Black superhero they always wanted to see, and the world will love it too. Yeah. So he kind of sees himself as sort of like, in sort of grandiose terms, as this sort of peacemaker in a way. He's bringing together different audiences, uniting them around this vision of what a superhero story can be, of what, virtue is, and like a wonderful quest, what the drama of cinema is. And he's getting everybody on the same page. And they're all sitting in the same theater, loving the same movie.
Also, Ryan Coogler's the director. And it'll go down in history. Like, that's historically important, especially like if we're looking at the trajectory of Coogler's career right now. The fact that, the box office breakout hit is a Disney movie won't be forgotten. But to jump off that, because this is a good way to get into like who the Disney adult is. Especially the way Black Panther. I remember there was a week where the Black and Asian audiences and white audiences, like there was like a word of mouth thing where like different racial groups were showing up more to support this movie. So you're kind of having a widening of who the Disney adult is. There's a reporter called Amelia Tate who did a great piece for the New States on Disney. And she talked about how like in her research, she found that Disney adults are mostly between 25 and 44, majority female, based in the US, well-educated, white. Just under half, 49%, identify themselves as left-wing. 9% are centrists. 18% are right-wing, including 1.5% who say they are far right. And then there's 10% who say they don't care, which to me is like so fascinating, right? So in your reporting, what else have you found about who the Disney adult is?
A few other characteristics jump to mind. One is, we touched on this already, but one is they're very wealthy. I went to a place called Golden Oak Ranch. Earlier this year, and I toured around the houses of some homeowners. That's the only residential development that's located on the grounds of a Disney resort.
So it's like a Disney neighborhood.
It's a Disney neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that's basically on the same land as Walt Disney World. Separated by a gate, and you have to have a code to get in.
Gated community within a gated theme park.
And the fascinating thing about this neighborhood, Golden Oak Ranch is very much in the Disney like brand universe. And what I mean by that is that there are just dozens and dozens of homes with like a Frozen room inside them and a Star Wars living room. And we're not just talking about like sort of little half-assing it here. We're talking about people who spend $6, $8, $12 million on their homes. It's astounding. There was the highest sale, if I'm remembering this correctly, it was $19 million for a mansion that had been owned by a woman named Hilda Bacardi. She was an heiress to the Bacardi rum fortune.
Oh, as in Bacardi.
Exactly.
Oh, casual. Okay.
So this is like, this was a really extraordinary property, and I met a bunch of people who lived there. A lot of them were like fairly typical, like, oh, I have grandkids, and I like it when they love to come, and they'll visit me more if I live at Disney World. And okay, here's another one: outsiderness, outsider sort of this feeling that your whole life you've been kept out of groups. And so when we talked before I came on about this article I wrote about the Disney social clubs. I don't know if it's too early to talk about.
No, let's talk about it. I love that.
So there's this fascinating trend, social trend that I wrote about last year about what were called, and I use were in the past tense, the Disneyland social clubs. And there were at one point there were 700 different Disneyland social clubs, these groups. And what they would do was they would gather every Sunday for the Sunday Fun Day at Disneyland. They would all be wearing these sleeveless denim biker jackets with patches all over them. They look like punks, like biker punks kind of. And they would just walk around Disney in big packs, and they would take over rides, and they would go get lunch together. And what happened, what we were talking about before with the annual passes, there's a lot of prices kept on going up. Annual passes were restricted. The Disneyland social clubs don't exist anymore. But I went down and I talked to a bunch of these guys. And the one club that really caught my imagination was this one called the Big Bad Wolves. And they were an outgrowth of the Southern California, like Chicano rockabilly subculture. So these were all guys, like a lot of them were like construction workers, or some of them worked for churches, or they were school teachers, very kind of working class jobs. They almost all lived in the area or in the Inland Empire or Orange County, California. And they were close by to Disneyland. But they were also really into like hot rod cars and like, bands like the Reverend Horton Heat and like all these, sort of old school kind of like punky, loud Tiger Army, like rockabilly bands. And they all wore like pompadours, greased back.
Oh, so I get it.
And if you look into this, I didn't know much about this subculture when I first met these guys. And then I looked more into it. And it's a very big point of pride among the Mexican-American community here. I learned this. There was something called, you may have heard of the Zoot Suit riots in the 1940s when they were conscripting young men into the army. There were a number of Chicano guys who were not being treated well by the white servicemen in the armies. And there was this kind of like, these famous riots in LA where all these greasers, these Latino greasers were getting beat up by like, Navy officers and stuff like that in the streets. And there were riots. And this was the Zoot Suit riots were a big turning point for this subculture that, almost 100 years later still existed and was still kind of like going strong. Yeah. And the way it was going strong, the format or the context in which it was going strong was at Disneyland. And I could not get over how fascinating that was. It was like this incredibly old legacy American media brand still nurturing these like esoteric subcultures related to like, minority ethnic groups in a place like LA. I mean, like, what more could you want out of a company? What other company on planet Earth is like a crucible for that sort of like cultural activity?
But I think it's because like, especially like how I've experienced America and growing up in London, there's a lot of parks, a lot of green spaces, a lot of third spaces, even though that's changing, right? Yeah. Where else could those men go to preserve that lineage and that that subculture? Are there parks? Are there other places that are open to it? And it's not about spending money. Disney is also very convenient. There's people that follow Disney food blogs because they're like, there's food places I can see.
That brings me to another point that I was going to say, another mode of Disney adult fandom. And that is what I would describe as sort of like the parochial nature of it. So this is more on like the people who have less means, not the richer people. But so I don't know if you've ever been to Epcot.
No, I haven't. But I know Epcot is where they opened the adults only lounge, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I don't know about that, but Epcot is one of the few where you can drink in almost every part of it. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who...
But they have a section, I think, that is adults only, which people are like,
that's interesting.
But Disney is for kids. Right, parents are like, I'm like, why am I going to bring my kids to this place?
Right. So Epcot is, it's my favorite one of the 4 theme parks in Florida. In Epcot, there is something called the World Pavilions. It's a big lake, and around it, there are pavilions from a lot of different countries. Not every country in the world, but there's the Japan pavilion, the China one, Norway, UK, a lot of African countries, a lot of Asian countries. And you can walk around this lake, and there'll be like 3 or 4 things. A little shop where you can buy doodads from whatever country that is. There's like a pub in the UK one called the Rose and Thorn where you can go have a pint of bitter and fish and chips. And then it's very cute. Like, it's all very well done. The Imagineers, who are the Disney designers who make all the theme parks, have done a great job at Epcot. But there are people in this world, I've met many of them, who think that it's better than going to those actual countries. They would rather go to the Italy pavilion at Epcot than to Italy itself. And sometimes it's not even a question of money. It's not like,
I mean, though they have the money to go, Italy would probably be cheaper.
That was actually a big issue last year, was like, is it actually cheaper to go to Europe for 2 weeks than it is to go for 1 week to Disney? And it's like, it's getting to that point.
Yeah, it's getting to that point.
In fact, there's one guy who I know who has a business that does tour guides at Italy, who is like deeply interested in this type of Italian architecture that is the Thomas Jefferson's Monticello is this type of architecture called Palladian architecture. It's like an erudite guy who reads books, who is very, very, but his favorite place to go in the world is Epcot and the Disney parks. And part of it is that everything is all in one place, right? You don't have to go too far. And so like, there's this kind of like parochialness to it, where you sort of you don't want to leave. You're not comfortable getting out of your comfort zone. You don't want to leave your little bubble that you've built, and that bubble is Disney because it offers so much. It offers so many different experiences that are foreign to you. It's all right here. You can do it. It's easy. It's an easy gateway to a lot of the world.
That's very intriguing to me, and I like that you've mentioned it, because I think there can be this tendency to speak about people who are in subcultures and fandoms or even cults, right? Because they're all kind of connected in a way, right? And speak about them in not just a pejorative manner, but act like they're stupid, right? Be like, oh, they're so stupid. You're so immature. But it's like, no, actually, these are like highly intelligent people, highly successful people, really sophisticated people with deep interior lives and reasons for doing it. And they've chosen Disneyland. And then for me, the fascination then becomes about Disney more than the people, right? Because Walt Disney famously said, "You're dead if you only aim for kids. Adults are only kids grown up anyway."
Walt Disney felt very strongly that the animated features that he was producing were not kids' movies. Snow White was not a kids' movie to him. It was a work of really beautiful adult-focused art.
Yeah.
And at the time, I mean, the innovations that he was working with and that he developed, the camera innovations, the innovations in hand-drawn animation, they really were, cream of the crop. Like, he was very ahead of his time. But I think today it's easy to forget that this is stuff that was not invented with kids in mind. It just happened to sort of be really great for kids. The story of the last 35 years or so of Disney history, of their corporate history and strategy, is you said a term earlier that's really apt, which is cradle to the grave, right? There's been a sense since Michael Eisner took over, which was in 1984, that Disney ought to make a really concerted effort to follow their customers through their life cycle, right? So, in other words, if you hook a kid in at age 5 or 6 with with Mickey Mouse Club and the cartoons, and then eventually they're coming with their family for their birthday or to the theme parks or for a family vacation, what happens next after that? And in the late 90s, the answer to that question was you get them watching Disney Channel, because Disney Channel sort of made this. It converted itself into a sort of a preteen brand.
Disney is where child stars go to gain fame.
It became Lizzie McGuire and Hannah Montana, and that only began. People forget that only began the very end of the 90s, early 2000s, right? And that was a very revolutionary decision they made, because you had this whole crop of kids that had gone to the expanded, bigger, better theme parks. The Hollywood studios had just opened in the early 90s. You were basically trying to capture. They were being spat out of this sort of kids Disney brand, and they needed a landing pad. And that landing pad was Disney Channel. And then when in 2005, Bob Iger took over as CEO, and he, first thing he did was actually more for the younger kids demographic, which was he bought Pixar from Steve Jobs, transformational acquisition. Disney's animation, Disney was basically losing kids. It was losing the ability to mint new Disney fans when they were kids because their animation was so bad. Nobody watched any of the movies they were putting out. And as soon as he bought Pixar, he suddenly had access to Toy Story, to Monsters, Inc., to Cars, all these incredibly popular franchises.
Great IP.
Great IP. The IP library's bulked up, and suddenly he's minting new children as Disney fans again. But he needed to keep that process going, whereby what happens to the preteens and the teenagers? Where do they go? So in 2009, he makes his next acquisition, which is Marvel. And Marvel
genius
it's the genius of that. First of all, Marvel became the most successful Hollywood studio in history. I mean, within they sold something like $35 billion in movie tickets at the box office in the space of less than 20 years, which is unprecedented in the history of Hollywood. For a long time, they could do no wrong. There were no movies that were not hits. But the real magic and the real genius of the Marvel acquisition was that suddenly teenage and young 20-something males had their franchise. As soon as Marvel is bought, you've got them for 10, 15 years more at least, if not for their whole lives.
Also girls that were like Black Widow. They were it brought in...
Captain Marvel made $1.2 billion. It was the first female-led superhero movie to cross $1 billion, I believe. And that's really remarkable. So so it was this vehicle that served a diverse, set of fans. Black fans suddenly had their favorite title with Black Panther. Women could glom on to Captain Marvel, to Black Widow, et cetera. But the real point was the age demographic that they suddenly had a super hard grasp on. What I'm trying to get at is that the last 30 or 35 years or so of Disney history has been about expanding the audience. For the first 60 years of Disney's history, that wasn't the strategy. The strategy was just make the best animated movies. And then when the 50s rolled around, they opened up Disneyland. It was this very interesting tourism experiments. Nobody had done a theme park quite like this before, and it had a lot of potential, but there wasn't really quite the same sort of mindful strategy behind it. But in the last few decades, Disney has gotten really strategic about how to expand its audience. And that's why that Disney fan who became a Marvel fan at age 17 or whatever who is now in their 40s or something, or late 30s, those are the guys who you see at the theme parks.
Okay. The cost factor of the parks, right, means that there are certain families who aren't taking their children to the parks to get those core memories, right? In 2024, it cost a 2-parent family with 2 young kids $4,266 to spend 4 days at Disney World, right? That's a lot of money, right? And so it kind of feels like with these higher prices, you're getting fewer future customers. Like the earnings call recently, they said parks revenue was up. So like it seems fine for now, but it seems a bit myopic to just be comfortable of it being like essentially a luxury experience that huge portions of not just this country, but the world, there were like English family, like we're saving up to go to Disneyland, Florida. That's going to be the big trip of the 5 years of this family. They can't afford it now. You're gonna lose a future customer.
Yes, Disney's parks have gotten incredibly expensive. The raise in prices for admissions passes is one thing. It's like outpaced inflation for 20 or 30 years. But the it's really just kind of like a lot of people look at it and say like, I'm out. I'm not going to pay $220 for a 1-day pass in the middle of the summer. I can't come anytime except for my kids are off of school.
And then you have to pay extra to be able to jump the line. And
so that's what I was going to say. So the passes for admission are one thing, but what's really been a huge benefit to Disney and a huge thorn in the side of fans is that you kind of can't go there anymore without paying for just like a ton of add-ons that just drive up the price by 5 or 10-fold. That's the real problem for families at least, or middle-class families at Disney. And the reason for that is because the parks, well, to a certain extent, the parks are a victim of their own success. They're incredibly popular. If you go there on a summer weekend day, for example, you're going to be in line the entire time you're there. You're going to have a terrible time. Everything you talked about, kids crying and puking and screaming and having to go to the bathroom, your day is going to be ruined and you're going to feel, oh my God, why did I spend all this money on this, right? And in previous years, previous eras of the Walt Disney Company, they have done a lot more to kind of like try to alleviate that pressure and make sure that people go home happy from theme parks. And so the history of this is very interesting. It all changed during the pandemic. So in 2020, Disneyland in California and California Adventure were closed for, I think it's 13 months, 14 months. And in Florida, they were closed for about 4 months. Even that 4 months in Florida was just a huge, huge blow to their finances. At the same time, Disney was and has been for the last 2 decades, essentially, a TV company. For a long time, the press has focused almost entirely on Disney's TV business because it was the one that made the most money. So it used to be something like 65 or 70% of Disney's income came from TV, and what that meant was ESPN. So ESPN is this incredibly profitable sports brand. They make all kinds of revenue streams from the carriage fees that cable providers pay them to sort of the ESPN Plus premium membership, all this stuff. And they're just like, nobody comes close to them when it comes to sort of like generating revenue. Every cable bundle, every time someone pays $80 a month for their cable bundle, the biggest cost in that bundle is always ESPN. They have incredible pricing power and they charge a huge amount of money for their channels. And so that was what was keeping Disney afloat for like 25 years, roughly. That all started to change around 2015. It was gradual, it wasn't all at once. But by 2020, when the pandemic hit, it was becoming very clear to the world that the TV business was not going to last.
And was that because of cord cutting and people moving over to streaming? Or?
It was cord cutting. It was the rise of streaming. I mean, don't forget that Disney only launched Disney Plus in order to combat Netflix and their encroachment on the media business in late 2019.
So like late adopters, essentially.
They were very late adopters.
Yeah.
I mean, there weren't too many others that beat them to it. I mean, but it's mainly Netflix and Hulu. But it was so you have these two things going on that are very seismic for Disney, especially for its finances. And one of them is the rapid death of the cable TV business, which had been their main moneymaker for a long time. And then you have the COVID-19 pandemic, which shuts down the parks. So overnight, essentially, sometime around February or March of 2020, Disney was making no money. They just weren't. All they had going for them was streaming.
Yeah.
And streaming had just launched. They were signing up tens of millions of customers a month.
But very discounted.
I mean, they were not even coming close to making up the money they were spending to produce content to put on the streamer. Yeah. So you're throwing out billions of dollars a month to produce the shows that get people to sign up, and then people are signing up or paying a discounted price. Started at $6.99 a month, which is like laughable to think about today. And so there was this really, really rough period where Disney had to figure out, it was existential. They had to figure out how to make some money from some business. And they couldn't do it in parks because parks were closed. And they couldn't do it in TV because TV was shrinking. And they had to do it in streaming, but streaming was still too immature a business for them to really figure out how to make the income they needed. So during that time, everyone's panicking, but they took a breath and they stepped back and they looked at the parks business and said, how can we make this parks business more profitable? And they came up with a bunch of ideas that I've written about a lot, and I feel like I know intimately, and I'm sort of a nerd and obsessed about them, but they are the add-ons that you're talking about. Yeah. They're called Genie Plus, they're called Lightning Lane, Individual Lightning Lane. There are all these premium products like tours. There's a tour you can get at Disney where a cast member, which they call Disney Parks workers, a cast member wearing like a checkered vest and a little, straw hat will come and take you around the parks. You know how much it costs?
Tell me.
$475 an hour.
Oh, an hour. I thought you were going to say 475. I was like, oh, that's...
And a minimum of 6 or 8 hours. I mean,
that's crazy.
The number of premium products they've rolled out since the pandemic has been just really stunning and startling. And the reason why they did it is because they're very smart and they knew that as soon as the pandemic eased, people would be so thirsty for in-person entertainment experiences. And they were exactly right.
I think you wrote that if I'm not mistaken, that for some people, Disneyland was like the first place they went. Like, was it?
I mean, I might have written
that.
I hope I wrote that.
There was something about like after COVID, I read it. So I think
it was just, so I wrote an article with a colleague of mine about 2 years ago that was basically about, it was this concept we had called funflation, which was like, there was so much pent up demand because people were stuck at home on their couches watching streaming all day and so bored and needed so badly to see people and be outside and in groups that when they were finally allowed to do that, the price of doing that, all the things that we love to do, going to concerts, going to sporting events, going to Disney theme parks, it rose meteorically. The prices rose. And it's not just, and with Disney, it's not just like I said before, it's not just the parks passes, it's everything. It's the line skipping app, it's the food, it's the $35 Little Mermaid bubble wands, it's the Mickey Mouse ears. And because they had such a solid purchase on the hearts of so many fans.
They went for it.
They went for it. They absolutely went for it. And it was this like overcorrection that is definitely leading, and Disney executives know this, it's definitely leading to this alienation of middle and lower class families. Yeah. Because if you're a lower middle class, especially family, if you say your household income's under $100,000 in the US, not exactly working class, but not really solidly middle class either, you really don't have much of a chance of going to Disney. There's no option really that works for your price point. And that's becoming very clear. I mean, I can tell you that inside the company, they're aware of it. But there's this balance that they have to strike, which is that they can no longer rely on television to pay the bills anymore. They have to rely on something else, and that something else is the theme parks.
So I want to get into something that's kind of connected about the relationship between Disney the adult and Disney adults and Disney the corporation. It's not a seamless relationship. It's not completely symbiotic. There are like power struggles there. You mentioned the story about the t-shirt earlier. Yeah. Bob Chapek was infamously booed at a D23 event. And, I don't know how true this is. They say that Disney doesn't necessarily like to hire Disney adults because they come in kind of like, the Eminem song Stan, Eminem wouldn't hire Stan. Right. You're like, this is going to be weird.
You have to have some distance.
You have to have some distance. So I want you to talk about that interaction between the corporation and the adults who give them a ton of money and have views and have ownership over it. And it feels sometimes like there's a tug of war there. Yeah. They need each other, but they don't like each other.
The actual shareholders of the Walt Disney Company are incredibly active. Like in 2004, when Michael Eisner was voted out as chairman of the company, it was just very contentious. There's a whole book about it. It's really great, called Disney War. Basically, that was an example of one of the most successful retail shareholder revolts of all time. What I mean by that is that some huge percentage of the mom and pop shareholders, people like you and me who just own a few shares of this company, they all mobilized and organized and voted to oust a CEO of this company that they loved so much.
I mean, it's better than getting shot as a CEO, which we know is happening now. So
yeah, absolutely.
No, I mean,
that's absolutely the worst space. But it's really, it says something about the company and who and how people interact with it on a corporate level as well.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of companies in the world where the retail shareholder base is as active as it is for Disney.
And you also get activist shareholders coming in, right? Because that's what happened with Peltz as well. But like, it's
right. That's a slightly different
thing. But I'm just saying it is, interestingly enough, the stakeholders always want to feel like they have a stake.
Exactly. Yeah. But in terms of like who the stakeholders are, how big and powerful and wealthy they are, even the lowliest Disney shareholder cares deeply about how the company is being run. So that's why you saw when Bob Chapek was CEO, you saw people, it was mainly like online mobs and stuff like that, but also like, the Disney blogs, the Disney Reddits, everyone was going crazy with everything he did that they disapproved of. They would say, oh, he's not doing proper maintenance on the rides at Disney World. This ride, here's another ride that's Chapeked. Or they would call him Bobby Paycheck.
Oh, I feel bad. Now I'm not me feeling bad for a rich man, but yeah.
And the same, and I should say that everyone gets it. I mean, Bob Iger gets it too when he makes what people feel. Even on the other side, every time I've written about Disney getting involved in politics, I get hundreds and hundreds of emails from Disney fans, from Disney shareholders, but just like normal people.
Angry or?
They're angry. They're saying to me, it's one or the other. They're either saying, you didn't focus enough on how woke Disney is. You should be writing the story about how Disney, when they go woke, they go broke. And that's the whole story here. You were talking about a bunch of other crap, doesn't matter. Or they're like, Disney is not sticking up for my group or for my interests, or they're not sticking up for LGBT people. Disney is racist. It's almost shocking that these people are looking at the same company because what they're saying about it is so diametrically opposed. Like one group thinks that some movie they made, that the Little Mermaid they made with a recast black lead instead of a white Ariel they think it's the greatest thing they've ever heard of in their whole lives. And the other half of the people think this is ridiculous. This is too woke. There's no other company that I know of where people make the connection between brand decisions and sort of like political statements and the character and interests and priorities of the corporate level.
But I also argue that Disney is also a container of what's happening in America.
Yeah.
Do you understand? So all of those factions, because it's the truth that we're like living in an age now where we all see the same thing and see something completely different.
If America is divided,
Disney is divided too.
Yeah.
So some people can look at, Halle Bailey as Little Mermaid and be like, wow, progress.
Yeah.
And other people be like, how dare you?
Yeah.
Ginger people are white, even though we know that's not true. But you know what I mean? It's just like, so I think like Disney is a great cipher in that sense, because it's just like, it's if you have a populace who just can't agree on anything, they're not going to really agree on what is the signal. Because you don't want my Princess and the Frog take. I'm like, why is the black girl a frog the whole movie? I'm like, we're supposed to get, but then other people can see it and be like, perfect, the black girl was a frog the whole movie. But it's like, it's this thing where we're not coming to it from the same vantage point. And I think in their attempt to be ostensibly neutral and this very broad mass appeal, then it actually, all the conflicts that we have as a masses do emerge in this brand.
That's very true. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why that is. And there's probably somebody who has a much better theory about that than I do. But I just tell you from my own experience, I don't know if you recall what happened in Florida in 2022. There was a state education law. I'm sure you've read about it. It was called they called it the Don't Say Gay law.
Yes.
It was actually called the Parental Rights in Education Bill. And it was a bill that restricted what teachers could and couldn't teach about gender and sexuality for elementary school kids. Because Disney has so many employees in Florida, and frankly, because so much of their parks and sort of creative teams, there's a lot of LGBT people on those teams because there's such a high concentration. Disney's employee base really felt that the company needed to be saying more about that and taking a stand against this bill that they felt was bigoted. and would be damaging to LGBT people. And that provoked this enormous conflict between Disney and the state of Florida. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was going after Disney very aggressively. He was
apparently he's a Disney adult too.
He got married at Disney World. He did. He is a Disney adult. Don't let him deny it. But he was also running. Obviously, he was also running for president at the time, which sort of colored things and intensified things as well. But that whole my point about that, I could talk all day about that topic alone, but that whole affair, one thing that it taught me was that Disney fans, Disney customers really do connect the product that they're consuming with the corporate leadership that produces it or makes the decisions that are producing it in a way that was unfamiliar to me before I started paying attention to Disney. So, for example, like I would write a story about how, Disney comes out and opposes this parental rights bill and says it's bad for gay and lesbian people. And then I would get 100 emails from people saying, I'm canceling my Disney Plus account. I don't want my kids watching this stuff or watching content made by some company that is woke and thinks it's okay to sexualize children. And then the next day, Disney would come out and sort of back off that position and say, okay, we don't want to get involved with politics. We respect the state's decision or whatever, backing off that sort of liberal perspective. And then all these liberal people would email me and be like, why isn't Disney standing up for the people who create their art and how dare they, right? Yeah. And so the word you use, container, is a good word for them. They're also like this sort of charged up radio antenna.
It's also amplified. And you mentioned like the corporate leadership part of it that I want to get to because, in my mind, if we see Disney as a cult or a church and the Disney adults as the congregation, the CEO is kind of the Pope, right? Whoever the CEO is has a massive impact on not just the decisions at Disney, but how the Disney adult and the public perceive those decisions.
Right.
And we know we have a succession race staring ahead of us. I'm curious to know what you think the impact of the next CEO/Pope of the Church of Disney, what impact will that have on the Disney adult and that fandom?
Sure. My book, for example, is called The House of Mouse, and that's a very direct reference to the old European houses like House of Borgia, House of, not to get too historical.
So is that in your book?
That is in my book.
So I incepted
That's
you.
The very title of my book.
So I incepted
this notion that the Pope,
I'm just a psychic.
This notion
I am a psychic.
I mean, what the popes did, they would all try to kill each other and poison each other. And don't forget, this is the best part. Don't forget, the Borgia popes, the Florentine popes, they were the patrons of some of the greatest artists of their day. Leonardo da Vinci.
Ryan
Coogler of his day. Right. So anyway, what will the succession decision
what impact will it have on the fandom?
On the fandom.
Yeah.
So most people I talk to believe that Disney's next CEO will either be a woman named Dana Walden, who's the head of the TV business right now, or a man named Josh D'Amaro.
So we have entertainment versus parks.
Theme parks. He's a theme parks chief, Not just theme parks, actually, but he's theme parks, consumer products, video games, cruises, and she's TV and streaming, I should say, as well. And there's also a possibility, of course, that they could be co-CEOs, get both of them in the same chair. There's a number of reasons.
Co-CEOs, that is like, to me, the equivalent of like an open marriage. No interest. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to do it.
You're going to vote against that?
Yeah, just pick somebody.
It doesn't have a great track record. Yeah. However, Netflix is doing it right now, and they're doing okay with it. And Bob Iger, the current CEO of Disney, is a big fan of Netflix. He thinks they're best in class for streaming. Yeah. And it wouldn't be the first time that he imitated Netflix if he did choose a co-CEO thing, or if he did recommend that to the board. However, here's what I'll say. Let's go through both of them. Dana Walden is a really smart executive. She would be the first female CEO of Disney.
Okay.
She is very similar in career arc to the current CEO, Bob Iger. She came up from network TV. She was sort of an outsider. She started as a publicist and then impressed her boss and got pulled up to the role of a studio executive. Rags to riches kind of story. Same thing that Bob Iger has. He started as a studio mole, bringing drinks to newscasters. And then he ended up, atop of the biggest TV company in the world.
So the key here is that she understands talent, right? Which is something to think about.
She's thought to have a really deft touch with talent. But the problem with that is that's pretty much exactly the profile that Bob Iger has. And a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth.
It's like Obama and Hillary. The baggage of seeming like a replication of what came before you, and when people might be tired
people
of what
like
came
to make
you.
a change.
Yeah, people like
So the other big problem with her chances to be CEO is that she is close friends with Kamala Harris. And this decision is going to be made most likely with a Republican in office, or most likely Donald Trump in office. And Donald Trump has actually attacked Dana Walden, not by name so much, but he's talked about how, you know, ABC News is run by Kamala's best friend, which isn't actually totally true, but it's he gets the connection between like an ally of one of his enemies running the Walt Disney Company would create a raft of problems for Disney. Because Disney, the fact of the matter is that Disney needs to play in politics to a certain
I mean, we saw what happened with the Kimmel
thing. I mean, the Kimmel, so that's a good thing to bring up. Jimmy Kimmel was suspended over remarks he made about the killing of Charlie Kirk. And that was a Disney decision, right? It wasn't like some government censor coming in and doing it. But they did it because they essentially they were anticipating blowback from Trump and from Trump voters. And during that whole affair, Trump was hammering Disney and talking about, not by name, but talking about this woman, Dana Walden, as being this sort of well-known liberal. She's not a friend of conservatives, not a friend of the Republican political movement that Trump is part of. There's a lot of like things to be worried about with her as CEO on the political side. There are a lot of things to be really confident about with her on the creative side. She seems to have a really golden touch when it comes to greenlighting the right content, steering Disney into the next era of its content production business. Okay, that's her. The next guy is Josh D'Amaro, who is he's sort of on the younger side for a senior executive at Disney. I think he's in his early 50s. He's a very charismatic guy, and he's almost like, the way people talk about him is like he's sort of like magnetic.
The fans love him, right?
And the fans love him. I wrote a whole story last year that the headline was something like, he raised prices over and over again.
Yeah, I saw that.
But the fans still
love him. Yeah, I love that.
It's almost, and it's really remarkable. I mean, he was so this guy, Bob Chapek, who was deeply unpopular with the fans, was CEO. He gave the order to raise prices, to make all these changes that were very unpopular. But the guy who was actually executing on this plan was this guy, Josh D'Amaro. But he somehow avoided getting any bullets.
Sounds like a Disney CEO.
Yeah.
Sounds like a future Disney CEO.
He knows what he's doing. He's a smart guy. So what does it mean for the fans? If it's Dana Walden, then it's my view, and this is not like, I shouldn't speak in absolutes, and I wouldn't want to, but my view is that Dana Walden will be very similar to Bob Iger. She's going to be somebody who focuses on content, focuses on the top of what's called the flywheel, which means Disney talks a lot about this idea of a flywheel. You create a piece of content, a movie or a TV show, and you monetize it in all these different ways. You sell pajamas and lunchboxes and theme park rides.
You put it in video games.
You put it in video
games. They know how
games,
to exploit the IP again and again.
She's at the top of the flywheel, and sort of I think it's safe to say, has a better skill set, a more accomplished skill set producing that kind of product. This guy D'Amaro, the parks guy, he has much more experience with the monetizing part, and that puts him in much closer contact with consumers, with fans. He's the guy who walks the park. I've walked the park with him for an hour at Disneyland, and he got stopped maybe 60 times.
Wow.
People wanting to take some of them were employees who were like, "Thank you so much, you're so great. Can we take a selfie?" Okay. Some of them were just straight up fans, and like people who, again, I know I've said like 10 sentences so far that start with, "I know of no other company that," but I do really know of no other company where divisional executives, people who are not CEO, but they're not even chief operating officer, they're not even C-suite executives, but they run a division within this company, are like recognized on the street by fans.
His Instagram is also quite popular.
It is. He has like 200,000 followers.
Which is like, especially such a central, and we didn't get into it that much today. It means you have to come back on when the book is out. But a central part of like Disney adulthood is your presence on social media and the TikTok fandom and the Instagram and YouTube and all of that, showing your memorabilia, showing secret parts of the park, et cetera, et cetera. And he's on Instagram and he's following and they're engaging with him.
You just hit something really important when you said secret parts of the park.
Yeah.
There's a number of layers to the Disney mythology that, there's the Disney Explorers Club, there's Club 33. There's all these Easter eggs hidden in the design of all the stuff around the parks. Josh actually engages with that stuff, which is unusual for a Disney executive, in part because Disney wants to be on the same page about like communicating with fans. They never want to sort of like, they don't like it when fans do their own things and like start their own little clubs. Yeah. DeMauro has been very smart about striking that balance where he's a company man. He like toes the company line very strongly and consistently, but he also meets fans where they are in a way that I've been impressed by. Okay. And so I get the answer I think to your question is, will we, with Dana Walden, if she's the CEO, she'll probably continue her run of producing very good content for Disney, which she began even before she joined Disney when she was at Fox and was involved in some really, making some really great shows that are very popular. And there will be a much higher learning curve for her to start interacting with fans and kind of like understanding what they want, whether it's tearing down this ride and replacing it with something else, or
the analog part of Disney, like being in the real world as opposed to consuming.
Whereas Josh DeMauro has a much better grasp, in my opinion, on sort of like the fan perspective of the side of Disney's operations. He's a very good operational executive. He knows finance very well, but he also he knows what fans want. Yeah, I think, and he gets excited right alongside them. So if I was a Disney adult and if I were deep in the fandom, I'd probably be rooting for him. But unfortunately, they're not the ones going to choose the next CEO.
Okay, well that leads us very nicely to my final question.
Go ahead,
Robbie.
Yeah.
Who is your money on? Who do you think it'll be? Josh or Dana?
It's a really hard question for me.
You have to pick one.
This is not my personal pick. It is me reading the tea leaves.
Yes.
The signals I read from the noise are that Josh is up right now. Josh DeMauro is up right now, and he has a better chance. Okay. There's a number of things you can look at. For example, the recent announcement of Disney's new park in Abu Dhabi, where he traveled with Bob Iger and did this huge rollout presentation, talking about how great it's going to be. It's their first park. It's in the Middle East. It's their first park. It's a very risky project, brand-wise. There's some problems with bringing the family inclusive brand to the United Arab Emirates. But giving him that assignment is a vote of confidence. Says we think you're going to do this well. It's a very sensitive thing. There's stuff like that keeps happening that makes me think that he might be up in the stakes. At the same time, here's why I have a lot of pause about this. I think that I know that Bob Iger is a man who's very concerned with his legacy. He's very concerned with what the world thinks of him, and I think that he feels sensitive about how his life and his work are too easily reduced to sound bites. And so one thing that's very important to him is encouraging diversity and empowering women and minorities at the company. And he wants to, I think he would really like to be thought of as the guy who named or chose or suggested the first female CEO of Disney in its 100-year history. And I think that's going to be a very strong pull. And if he chooses Josh DeMauro, it'll be another white man like him, and that he'll take some flack for that. I'm not sure how much stomach he has for that, if it's going to be a major factor or not.
Especially in the light of this Kimmel stuff, which is like you saw a real dip in how people were speaking about Bob Iger. People really excited, rooting for him to come back, and there's kind of been this dip. So maybe he'll be more conscious of again, his legacy, the public perception. What does it look like giving another white man the job instead of a woman making history?
However, that same affair you're talking about, the Jimmy Kimmel issue, taints Dana Walden as well, because she was a decision maker there as well.
Right,
so if you're talking about whose fault is it that they gave in to pressure from the Trump administration, if you're the kind of person who thinks that they shouldn't have done that and they shouldn't have given in to that political pressure, you probably have a problem with how Dana Walden played a role in it as well. So again, all this is sort of vibes. These are the people we're talking about as having these reactions are not the people in Disney's boardroom who are going to be choosing who it is, but those people in the boardroom are very attuned
to the vibes.
To the vibes, right? And so it's going to be really interesting to watch. I'm not saying I would bet on this, but my sense is that Josh DeMauro, the Parks guy, has a slight edge right now.
Okay. Robbie, this has been great. I learned so much. Thank you for coming on.
It was fun talking about it.